Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com. In this two-part tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to use Atlas track switches, track accessories, and the Atlas signal system on your layout. In part one of this tutorial, which is what you're watching now, I'm going to be focusing on the track, the switches, and the track accessories, and then in part two, we'll cover the signals. Now, for each of these parts, I'm going to start off on the workbench, where I'll show you how to hook everything up on a test track, and then at the end, we'll come out here and I'll show you how it looks and works on a real layout. So let's go ahead and go back to the workbench and get started. Okay, this is the demo board we're going to use today. I've got a couple power supplies over here. We'll get back to these later. Now, for those of you who are going to ask, this demo board is made out of a material called Homasote. Homasote is a soundboard material that is used to absorb sound. Ordinarily, it's used in construction to get rooms and buildings more quiet, but we also like to use it on train layouts. Ordinarily, what you do is you lay the Homasote directly on your plywood and you secure it down either with glue or screws or both, and then you put your roadbed and your track on top of the Homasote, and that allows your trains to run much more quietly than they would if they were running on just bare plywood. So that's what this stuff is. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I've got it riding up on some 2x4s so that I can easily get wires underneath it for today's demonstration. But like I said, ordinarily you would secure this to the plywood on your layout. That's all I'm going to say about it. If you're interested in more information about Homasote, including where to buy it, check out their website, which is www.homasote.com. This is the track we're going to use today. This is 3-rail O-scale track from Atlas, and I like Atlas track for a few reasons. First of all, I like the shape of the rails. They've got this nice T shape to the rails that I find to be very realistic, especially when you weather it. Another thing that I like about Atlas track is that the ties, to me, are very prototypically sized, and I like that a whole lot. And then lastly, I think Atlas track is just very easy to work with, given that it's so realistic looking. And so for those reasons, I choose Atlas track. Now, I know a lot of you guys are die-hard Gargraves fans or Lionel or MTH track fans. That's okay. I'm not saying that those brands are bad. I just prefer to use Atlas track, and that's really what it comes down to. Whichever brand of track you go with is really a personal preference. There really isn't a bad brand of track. It just comes down to what your needs are and what your preferences are. And in my case, I like Atlas track, and that's what we're going to use today. The way that Atlas track works is quite simple. These sections of track are joined by these track clips that are on the end of each section of track. They pop off like that. They're made of metal and they have a little bit of rivet detail, so they look nice. And when you get a piece of track from the factory, you'll have two clips on this end and one on this end, so that when you get a second piece, all you do is line them up and snap them together like that. That's all there is to it. And when it's time to take the track apart, it's no big deal. All you do is pull it apart like that. One of the nice things about this clip system is that it allows you to easily swap out these metal clips for plastic insulating clips, so that if you want to, you can electrically isolate one section of your layout for another, like if you want to do power districts or something like that, or you can do it on just one rail and create an insulated rail. All you do is just take the metal clip out like that, and then Atlas sells these insulated plastic clips separately, and you just slide it on like you would the metal clip, and then put your track back together. And now what you have is the plastic clip here that electrically isolates this rail from this rail. So any current that's in this rail would not be in this rail, and you can use this insulated section to trigger an accessory or a signal or anything else you want. And that's exactly what we're going to do in part 2 of this tutorial when we get to signals. We're going to use an insulated rail to trigger our trackside signals. So if you're confused by this, if you've never done this before with an insulated rail, don't worry, I'll explain more about this in part 2 when we tackle signals. Another great thing about this clip system is that it allows you to very easily and very inconspicuously provide power to the track on your layout. If you look at the underside of these metal clips, you'll see that it's flat. And that means that if you wanted to, you could solder wires onto the undersides of these clips and then use the clips themselves as power feeds to the track on your layout. Well, the nice thing is that Atlas already does this for you. They sell a product separately that's called terminal joiners. And they look like this when you buy them. And when you take them out of the package, this is what you get. You get two clips, a black clip and a silver clip, and they've soldered a wire onto the underside of each clip. And then all you do is connect the black clip to the center rail, like that, and connect the silver clip to the outer rail, like that. And then look at that, you've got power feeds to your track. Then all you do is drill a hole in your table, run these wires down through the hole, and then just like that, you've got a very well hidden, very inconspicuous power supply to the track on your layout. And what's even better is that if you ballast this track, these power feeds become practically invisible. So we'll get more into these when we do the test track, but I wanted to show you these because this is just one of the many advantages of this clip system that Atlas uses. Okay, so now that you've seen the basics of how Atlas track works, let's take a look at an Atlas switch. When you buy an Atlas switch, this is the box it'll come in. It's got a lid that flips up like that so you can see what's in there. We've got the switch right here, and this is an 072 switch in case you were wondering. The hookup wires are right here. The control mechanism is here. The screws and connector plates are right here. And then up here we've got an optional sliding ramp. So let's go ahead and take it out of the box and have a closer look. Here's what the switch looks like out of the box. As you can see, it's very nice looking. It's very well built. Now, there are a couple things I want to point out about these switches, and then after that, we'll start building our test track. First thing is that you'll notice that there are no track clips on the ends of the rails on these switches. And that's because the track clips are packaged separately in a little baggie, and that allows you to attach them only as needed when you connect the switch to the rest of the track on your layout. Another nice thing about these Atlas switches is that the manual control mechanism and the switch motor are both attached to the switch when you buy it. That means that these things are ready to use right out of the box. You can throw the switch by hand by using this lever right here, but there's also a motor in here, so if you wire up these terminals, you can throw the switch remotely. As nice as this ready-to-run solution is, however, a lot of modelers require or desire a custom solution when it comes to how the switch gets thrown. Well, Atlas knew that when they designed these switches, and so even though they come ready to run like this whole setup here can be removed and or reconfigured to fit any need you may have. Let me show you what I mean. For example, you may find yourself in a situation where you want to use the switch machine that comes with the switch, but you need to move it to a different spot because of a clearance issue of some sort. Well, you can do that. If you look at the instructions that come with the switch, this is how the switch machine is when it's out of the box, but you can detach it and move it into one of these two alternate positions. All you have to do is undo two screws back here, and the entire switch machine will detach from the switch, and then you can put it into one of those two alternate positions, like you see here. Or you may find yourself in a situation where you don't want to use this switch machine at all, and instead you want to use some sort of custom solution to throw the switch. You can do that too. All you have to do is remove the switch machine, and you're good to go. With the switch machine out of the way now, if you look at the throw bar here, you can see that there's a hole right here, and there's another hole just like it on the other side. I'm not sure if you can see that one, but it's there, and it looks just like this hole over here. And that means that if you stick something in one of these holes and then move it, you throw the switch like that. So with these holes, you can now implement any number of custom solutions to throw this switch. There are 3 custom solutions that come to my mind right away. If you were looking for an above-the-table solution, a very popular alternative is to use a hand-actuated ground throw from Caboose Industries. It's a very aesthetically pleasing little ground throw mechanism that installs right here, and it hooks into that hole, and then it's got this nice little throw mechanism, and when you throw it, it moves this bar and throws the switch. If, on the other hand, you're looking for an under-the-table solution that keeps the switch machine out of sight, there are 2 options that come to mind there. The first one is that Atlas makes an under-table version of the switch machine that you just saw. It secures to the underside of the table, and then it has a rod that comes up through the table and into this hole, and then when you activate it, it throws the switch. Another very popular under-the-table solution is to use a Tortoise switch machine. It works very much in the same way, except it has a much more slow, realistic action when it throws the switch. Now, those were just a few of the most popular custom solutions, but obviously you can use any method you want to throw these switches, and that's the nice thing about them. These switches really appeal to 2 types of modelers. If you're the kind of modeler who's looking for a ready-to-run solution, these things are ready to go right out of the box. But if you're the kind of modeler who needs a custom solution, they can handle that too. Okay, so now that I've gone over the basics of Atlas track and switches, let's go ahead and start building our test track. Okay, I've started building my test track. I've got a 4.5-inch straight piece here. Then I've got my 072 switch. Now this line going this way is going to be my main line, so to speak. And then this line going over here will be my siding. And then on the far end of the demo board, the siding will rejoin the main line with another 072 switch. But before I go any further, I want to drop a power feed for the track. So right here, I'm going to install one of these terminal joiner packs that I showed you earlier. Alright, this is where I want to install those terminal joiners. Now I've already drilled a hole in the table for the wires. Here are my terminal joiners, and on the other end, I've got the wires right here. And so all I'm going to do is just feed those wires down through that hole. Like that. Okay, and now I've got my two joiners here. The black one's going to go on the center rail, and the silver is going to go on the outer rail. Now, before I can attach these clips, there's a problem I need to deal with real quick. If you look here, you'll see that there's a plastic clip right here, and that plastic clip is normally used to assist in joining two sections of track. It's not required, but it's nice to have it there. But in order to install these clips, we need to get part of this clip out of the way because it'll interfere with the wire and the solder joint that's on the underside of this silver clip. So to get rid of the inside part of this clip, all I do is take a flat blade like this and just push down like that. And then I do the same thing over on the side. And there we go. Now the side of that clip is out. So now I should be able to install this silver clip without any fuss. And there we go. And now I'm going to put the black clip on the center rail. Like that. And there we go. Now that I've got those clips on, I'll just hook up the rest of my track like I normally would. Here's a straight section that I was going to put on. And I'll just slide it in there like that. So now I've got my track the way I wanted it, but I've got a power feed here that goes under the table. So now let's go find the other end of those wires and we'll connect them to the transformer and give some power to the track. Here are the two wires coming from those terminal joiners that we just hooked up to the track, and I'm going to connect them to this transformer so that when the time comes, we'll have power for our track. Now this transformer is a Lionel CW80. That really doesn't matter. The only reason I'm using this is because I had it sitting around and I wasn't using it for anything else. Over here, I've got an MTH Z1000. I'm going to use this to power these switches and the signals when the time comes. And I sort of did this deliberately just to show you that it doesn't matter what brand of transformer you use. I've got a Lionel transformer here, an MTH transformer here, and these are both going to Atlas switches, Atlas track, and Atlas signals. So the brand really isn't important. What's important is that you have the right size transformer to fit your needs. Anyway, let's go ahead and hook it up. The red wire will go to the red terminal. And of course the black wire will go to the black terminal. And there we go. So now once we complete our test track, we'll have some power for the track. So now let's get back and finish the test track. Okay, as you can see, the test track is all set up now. I've got 072 curves out here on the siding, and then back there where the siding comes back into the main line, I've got another 072 switch. The track is being held down with track screws made by Atlas, specifically for Atlas track. They work really well. I recommend them. That's what I use on my layout. Now, that power feed that we just dropped a minute ago, that should be enough to power this small test track here, but obviously on a larger layout, you'd want to use more power feeds. On my own layout, I drop a power feed about every 6 feet. Anyway, the track is ready to go now, so the next step is to hook up our switches and accessories. We're going to start by hooking up 2 track accessories out here. Let's take a closer look. The first track accessory that we're going to hook up is right here. This is an uncoupling track from Atlas, and basically what it is an electromagnet. And when you activate it, it'll throw the coupler on any 3-rail O-scale freight or passenger car equipped with a thumbtack or drop plate coupler. It's basically a more modern, aesthetically pleasing version of the old school Lionel uncoupling track sections that you used to see back in the day and that they still make today. It's very easy to hook up. There's just one wire coming from this terminal, and I've got it going into a hole and under the table and over by the transformers. Now, this is one of the few accessories that I'm actually going to run off track power because it's already wired to get the ground from these outer rails, so it needs the hot from the center rail. So what we're going to do is run this wire over by the transformer through a switch and then to the hot on the transformer that powers the track. So let's go ahead and follow this wire down under the table and to the transformer, and we'll hook it up. Okay, we're over by the transformer. This is a momentary push button switch that comes with the uncoupling track when you buy it. This wire on this side of the switch is coming from the uncoupling track that you just saw, and then this wire on the other side of the switch is going out to the transformer that powers the track. Here's the other end of that wire, and all I'm going to do is hook it on to the hot terminal of the transformer that powers the track, which in this case is the red terminal, of course. And I'll just wrap it around and then tighten it. Now, I know it's a little weird having a black wire going to the red terminal, but this is the wire that comes with the uncoupling track, so that's what I'm using. And this is how it's supposed to be hooked up. So we've got that hooked up right. Now let's give some power to the transformer. There we go. And now let's power up the track. And let's go see the uncoupling track in action. Okay, I've got a 3-rail O-scale freight car here. This car is made by MTH, and I'm doing that to show you that it doesn't matter what brand of car you're using. It could be MTH, Lionel, Weaver, or Atlas, or something else. The brand doesn't matter. All that matters is that the car either has a thumbtack coupler or a drop plate coupler. In this case, these MTH freight cars have drop plate couplers. But all you do is roll the car up over the uncoupling section like that, and then push the button just for a second, and watch what happens. It throws the coupler. Now, one important thing to note about these uncoupling tracks is that when you activate them with these buttons, you don't want to hold the button down for any length of time. This is what you want to do. Just like that. This is what you don't want to do. If you do that, over time it'll cause that electromagnet to overheat, and that'll start to melt the plastic casing on the uncoupling track. And this is nothing new. On the old Lionel uncoupling track sections, the same thing would happen. If you held them down for too long, eventually it would start to melt the plastic casing. And it's because that electromagnet generates heat when you activate it. And so all you need to do is tap it. You don't need to hold it down. Just do like this. And that's all that's needed. The next track accessory that we're going to hook up is this set of accessory rails from Atlas. There's a rail right here and a rail right here, and following the instructions I drove these rails into the ties. And what these are is a more modern, more aesthetically pleasing version of the old accessory activation track from Lionel. And you use these to activate operating cars on your layout. So if you have an operating dump car or an operating box car where the guy comes out of the box car, that's what you'd use these for. Now, there's a wire that hooks up to each one of these rails. I've already gone ahead and run those wires under the table over to the accessory transformer. So let's go over there and hook it up and see it in action. Okay, we're back over by the transformers, and you can see I've added a second switch here to control those accessory rails. There were 2 wires coming from those accessory rails, 1 wire from each rail. Here's the first wire here from one of the rails. And here's the wire from the second rail, but the wire from the second rail is running through this second switch. It comes in here from the rail, then goes out here, and here's the end of that wire. So now what we're going to do is take these 2 wires from those 2 rails and connect them to our accessory transformer, which is the MTH Z1000. Here's the accessory transformer, and as I said, this is an MTH Z1000, but the brand really doesn't matter. All that matters is that it's big enough to fit our needs. This is a 100 watt brick that puts out a fixed 18 volts AC, and that's perfect for running our accessories. Now I've got the output of the Z1000 coming over to this terminal block, which is also made by MTH, and this will allow us to connect multiple items to this transformer very easily, because we're not only going to have to connect these accessory rails, but later on in this tutorial we're going to be connecting switches and signals and so forth, and so we're going to need all of these terminals to do that. I've got the 2 wires coming from the accessory rails right here, and I've stripped about 1/2 inch of insulation away from each wire, and we're going to go ahead and connect these to these terminals. 1 wire to the black side, 1 to the red side. Now, with the accessory rails, it really doesn't matter which wire goes to the black and which one goes to the red, so we'll just pick one and go with it. So, 1 wire is going to go over here on the red side, like that, and the other wire to the black side. Now, some of you may be saying, Eric, why are you using 2 transformers for this? Why don't you just use 1 transformer for your track and your accessories? Well, you can do that. There's really nothing wrong with that. And certainly if you don't have the budget for 2 transformers, you could do it all with 1 transformer, but I like to keep it separate. I like to have my track powered by 1 power supply and my accessories powered by another. That's just the way I like to do it. You can do it any way you want. Anyway, we've got these hooked up now, so let's go see those accessory rails in action. Okay, here's the car we're going to use to test these accessory rails. This is an operating box car made by MTH, and the way it works is that when you roll the car over those accessory rails, there are contact shoes on the undersides of these trucks, and they come in contact with those accessory rails, and then when you activate those rails, it'll cause the car to start up and do whatever function it's designed to do. In this case, the door will open up and the guy inside will start throwing out boxes of dry ice, and you'll also get a little bit of a smoke effect. So I've got the car over the accessory rails. I've got power to the track and power to the accessory rails. So let's go ahead and press that button that we installed and see what happens. And there we go. Pretty neat. Okay, the last thing we're going to do for part 1 of this tutorial is wire up both of these switches on this test track so that they can be controlled remotely. Setting one of these switches up for remote operation is pretty simple. It starts right here with these 3 terminals on the switch motor. Now when you get the switch out of the box, there won't be any screws in the terminals, but Atlas packs the screws separately with the switch. So let's go ahead and put the screws into the terminals. Once the screws are in the terminals, it's time to wire up the switch. Atlas provides enough wire to get started with the switch, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Here's the spool of wire that Atlas packs with the switch. It's not a whole lot, it's maybe about 3 feet or so, but it's enough to get going. Obviously, if you've got a big layout and you're going to have 5, 10, 20 feet between the switch and the control box, you'll probably need to buy some more wire, but this is enough for today's purposes. Now, you'll notice that this cable is comprised of 5 wires, but on the switch motor, we've only got 3 terminals, so we only need 3 of these wires to wire up the switch motor. The other 2 wires on this cable, we're going to need for the switch control box that we'll wire up in a couple of minutes. So what we're going to do is split this cable into 2 sections, one with 2 wires and one with 3 wires. I'm going to split this cable up so that the green, black, and red wires are one cable, and then the second cable will be the yellow and blue wires. To split it up, it's pretty easy. I just put it down on a cutting mat, like I've got here, and then I take an X-Acto knife, and I put it in the seam between the yellow and the red wires. And then, instead of pulling the blade through the wire, I actually pull the wire across the blade. Like that. And now you have a nice split. And then I'll go down a couple more inches and do that again. Like that. And I'm going to keep doing this down the entire length of the cable until I've got them completely split up. Okay, I've got the cable split into 2 cables now, the blue and yellow cable and then the red, black, and green cable. We're going to set the blue and yellow cable aside for a moment and just use this cable with the 3 wires and wire up the switch motor. As you can see, I've stripped back each of these 3 wires in this new cable that we made, and we're going to go ahead and hook these up to this switch motor here. Now the way it goes is the green wire goes to the outside terminal, the black wire goes to the middle terminal, and the red wire goes to the inside terminal. So let's go ahead and hook these up. Okay, there you have it, green, black, and red. And now I'm feeding the rest of the cable through this hole in the table, and that'll take it over by the transformers where we're going to hook up a switch control box. So let's go ahead and head over there and get this job finished up. Over here by the transformers, you can see I've added one more device. This is the switch control box to control the switch that we're wiring up. Now, when you buy an Atlas switch, this is the type of control box that's included with the switch. And this is a basic controller. There's nothing wrong with it, but today we're going to use a fancier control box. This is the number 57 Deluxe switch control box available from Atlas. And it works the same as the basic control box, except that it's just a little fancier. It's got lights and it's got a nice throw arm right here. So that's what we're going to use. But regardless of whether you use the Deluxe switch control box or the basic one that comes with the switch, the setup instructions are exactly the same. Anyway, so here's that 3-wire cable that's coming from that switch motor that we just wired up. I've got it coming up through the table, and we're going to connect that cable to this switch control box. And the way it goes is green wire, black wire, red wire. So let's go ahead and hook that up. And there we go. We're all done here. So now let's move over to this side of the control box, and we're going to use that yellow and blue wire that we created to bring some power into the control box. Here's that yellow and blue cable, and what we're going to do is connect it right here on the switch control box. And the way it goes is yellow right here and blue right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now that that's done, we're going to take the other end of this yellow and blue cable and feed it down through this hole that I've drilled in the table, and we'll bring it up over by the accessory transformer. Here's the terminal block for the accessory transformer, and we're going to hook up the blue wire to the hot or red side, and then the yellow wire goes to the common or black side. And there we go. We're all done wiring this up, so let's go see the switch in action. Alright, here's our switch controller, and you'll note that the light is now on because we're getting power from that accessory transformer. Here's the switch we're going to be controlling, and because the switch is set to straight, the light is green. If I want to throw the switch, I knock this lever over that way, it turns that light red, and then I press this button. And it throws the switch. If I want to go back straight again, knock it back over to green, and press the button again. Pretty cool. Now, it should be noted that I'm able to throw the switch regardless of track power. Right now, I've actually got the CW80 that's powering the track turned off, but I'm still able to throw the switch because the switch motor itself is powered by the accessory transformer, not track power. So now that we've got this switch wired up to this control box, let's do the same thing for the second switch on our test track. Connecting a switch controller for a second switch is even easier because you don't have to redo these power wires over here, because the current from these power wires comes over to these terminals over here, and then Atlas packages these crossbars with the controllers, and you just install the crossbars and then plug it up like that, and you're good to go. Now all we have to do is bring in those 3 wires from that second switch motor, and then we're all set. Okay, I've wired up this controller to the second switch motor on that second switch at the end of the test track, so let's give it a try. Okay, so now we've got these 2 control boxes connected to the 2 switches on our test track, but you may run into a situation on your layout where you want to use a single controller to throw both switches at the same time. That's easily done. For example, let's say we want to use this number 1 controller to throw both of our switches. All we have to do is take the wires off of this second control box and add them to these terminals on the first control box. Let's go ahead and do that. I've disconnected these 3 wires from this second switch controller, and again, these 3 wires are going out to that second switch on the test track. And what I'm going to do is move them over here and connect them up to these terminals in the same order as the existing wires, green, black, and red. And there we go. Now I've got 2 green wires on this terminal, 2 black wires here in the middle, and 2 red wires on this terminal. And what that means is that when I activate this switch control box, it'll throw both switches at the same time and in the same direction. So if I go diverting like this and throw it, that throws both switches at the same time and they're both diverting. And if I go back green or straight, now both switches are back straight. You may also find yourself in a situation where you want to throw both switches at the same time like we're doing here, but you want the switches to throw in opposite directions of each other. So when one goes straight, the other one goes diverting. Well, as I said, this is set up so that they both throw in the same direction at the same time, so they're either both straight or both diverting. To change that, it's very easy. All you have to do is take the wires coming from one of the switches and reverse the green and red wires. This is how it looks when you want to wire these things up to throw opposite of each other. I've taken the green and red wires coming from the second switch and I've reversed them. So now, instead of having 2 greens, 2 blacks, and 2 reds on these terminals, I've got green and red, 2 blacks, and green and red. And what that means is that when I activate the switch controller, it'll throw both switches at the same time, but in opposite directions. So when I go diverting, the first switch goes diverting, the second switch goes straight. And when I go back, it's just the opposite. The first switch goes straight, and the second switch goes diverting. Now, of course, I realize that on our test track here, this sort of opposite configuration doesn't really make sense. On a siding situation like we've got on our test track, you would probably want both switches to throw in the same direction at the same time. But I just wanted to show you the opposite setup so that if you run across a situation like that on your own layout, you'll know what to do. Okay, we're going to stop right here for now. I've shown you the basics of Atlas Track, how to hook up and operate Atlas switches, as well as some of the Atlas Track accessories. In part 2 of this tutorial, we'll start to work with some of the Atlas trackside signals. But before I let you go, let's go out to the layout and I'll show you some of these elements in a real layout setting. Okay, we're out on my layout, which features Atlas Track and switches, and right here we've got an 072Y switch made by Atlas, and I've got it connected up to this number 57 switch control box. Now, most of the switches on my layout are hooked into my MTH AIU, or Accessory Interface Unit, and then I'm able to control the switches with the MTH DCS remote. But for a few of my switches, I've got them set up so that I can also throw them by hand. And I like to do it because it's fun for me to be able to throw some by hand sometimes, and it's also fun for visitors that come to the layout. They can throw a switch or two and they don't have to use the MTH DCS remote. So anyway, I've got this hooked up exactly like we had the switch on the test track hooked up, and throwing it is just as easy. Just like that. And even though this may look a little nicer with the ballast and the weathered track and all, it's hooked up exactly the same. Here's something else. I've got this switch here connected to an uncoupling track over here, just like we had on our test track. This is the yard lead on my layout, and when I pull a train in here, if I need to, I can uncouple a car using the uncoupling track. Okay, that about does it for part 1 of this tutorial. Stay tuned for part 2, in which we will implement the Atlas signal system on that test track. That should be a lot of fun. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. I'm Eric Siegel, and I'll see you next time.